suspended for a month.
All right, we've got John Lott with us.
John Lott, he's the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, had a great article up in Newsmax this morning. Hey, John, thank you for your time again.
Thanks very much for having me.
You bet.
So I loved that, what you talked about in your Newsmax column is something we've all talked about, and you've talked about even on our show. And, the left, anytime there's a shooting, screams about guns, screams about this, and ignores things that would actually help solve the problem. And I think this case in Tennessee really drives it home, where apparently the shooter was initially going to target someplace else, but decided that there was too much security there, so went to the gun-free zone school and committed the crime there. And you talk about that in your column today, the Newsmax column, right?
Right. Well, I mean, this happens time after time. The thing is that the news media, the national news media, ignores this. It's just not this case, but, take something like the Buffalo mass murderer from last year. In his manifesto, which the media claims that they were covering, he spends a great deal of time explaining why he picked the target that he did. And right up there at the top was he wanted to pick a target where he knew his victims wouldn't have permitted concealed handguns, because he thought it would make it a lot easier for him to go and kill lots of people. On our website at crimeresearch.org, we have literally dozens of those types of cases listed, but the media just refuses to mention it. You would think people would be very interested in knowing why do these guys pick the targets that they do? Do they pick them because their goal is to get media coverage, and they know the more people they kill, the more media coverage they're going to get? And so they may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid.
Right.
There are places where victims can't defend themselves.
Right. Well, I remember years I covered the Aurora Theater shooting case, right? And in that, the shooter in that case basically said the same thing. And that was many years ago, right? I picked the theater because I knew no one would have a handgun, and I wanted to get out of
the theater prohibited people
right.
from carrying handguns.
What happened in the Aurora Batman movie theater shooting case, there were 7 movie theaters that were showing the premiere of the Batman movie within a 20-minute drive of the murderer's apartment. Only one of those places banned permitted concealed handguns. It wasn't the movie theater that was closest to his apartment. It wasn't the one that had the largest auditoriums in the state of Colorado. He went to and he cased the places. We know that he cased the places beforehand, and he had another target that he had been thinking of, but he was worried also about security there. So he picked the one movie theater that ban people being able to go and protect themselves.
Well, and in this case too, they talk about the heroic headmistress, and it seems like indeed she was, right? She rushed, and she seemed to be trying to prevent it. But you got to wonder, well, what if she'd had a gun, right? I mean, the left gets all bent out of shape about the concept of arming teachers who are trained and willing to be armed, and saying, oh, that's horrible. We don't want to turn, we don't want to turn our schools into prisons, but we are willing to turn them into slaughter
mills.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be. I know it's frustrating for me, but this is what you guys do. It's got to be frustrating over and over and over again to see this and have the media and the left drive this narrative that somehow, we can't do anything to actually solve it. We just have to scream about guns.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is extremely frustrating. I mean, you have things like Democrats pushing for background checks on private transfers of guns because of this. I wish somebody in the media would ask them, well, would it have stopped this last attack? Would it have stopped any of these mass public shootings this century? And the answer is no. But yet they keep on pushing it out there. It makes me believe that the reasons why they claim they want it are completely unrelated to what's actually happening and what they claim they do. But, you have Biden just a couple of weeks ago. He goes out to Monterey Park, California. California's just had a spate of mass public shootings. They have a rate of mass public shootings that's much higher than the average for the rest of the country. And he goes and he says, well, we need to have an assault weapons ban. We need to have background checks on the private transfers of guns. We need to have red flag laws. Well, guess what? California already has all those laws. Yeah. And yet they have a much higher rate of mass public shootings than the rest of the country.
Right.
And yet Biden doesn't see the irony in going over there and saying, boy, we need to make the rest of the country emulate the types of rules that they have in California. what I think has happened in California is that the reason why they have so many attacks is because of their gun control laws. You look at Los Angeles County, where 2 of these recent mass public shootings have occurred there. Only 1 out of every 5,600 adults in Los Angeles County have a concealed carry permit.
Oh.
In San Mateo County, where another one of these mass public shootings occurred earlier this year, they only have 1 concealed carry permit for every 24,000 adults.
Wow.
You look at the rest of the country, you know, basically the 43 right to carry type states, you have 1 permit holder for every 9 adults. The point is that, you know, somebody going and attacking a place in Los Angeles County or Mateo County, it has no worry that they're going to run into somebody who's going to be able to go and stop them. You know, I recently, when I was at the Department of Justice, one of the things I was tasked with was to look at these active shooting cases. Active shooting cases are incidents where a gun is fired in public, not part of some other type of crime like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf. And you could have anything from 1 person being shot at and missed all the way up to a mass public shooting. Looking at the data from 2014 through 2021, you find over half of the active shooting attacks were stopped by legally armed citizens in places where they were legally allowed to carry guns. So, you know, but that's not happening in places like California or New York or whatever.
I must say the other thing that always bothers me is Sean Hannon and others saying, I want a armed guard, you know, police officer, peace officer in every school and which costs a fortune, right? And most of them will have nothing to do all day, which is never good. But if you arm the teachers, you don't have 1 person who may be a coward. That's happened down in Florida and Uvalde. Even there are a lot of cowards, but other places you have, and you can't have 1 person get sick. Yeah, you don't know which one has it. If you want to make a school safe, you give the teachers who want to take the training, and the person doesn't know where to go to avoid it.
Yeah, exactly. Look, here's the problem. I mean, I know that there are going to be bills put up in Congress to go and have more funding to put a police officer in each school. But you have 1 person in uniform. They have an almost impossible job stopping these attacks. These attackers have real tactical, strategic advantages.
Right.
You know, if you have only 1 person in uniform who's readily identifiable, you can wait for that person to leave the area before you attack, or you can move on to another target yourself. Or if you're going to attack that, what you do is who do you think you shoot first? You shoot 1 person in uniform because you know he's the only person with a gun. As you exactly say, if you have armed teachers who are carrying concealed, you don't know who has it any more than you know when you go to a grocery store or a movie theater or something, whether somebody next to you is armed or not. And the thing is, if you are going to have an armed officer there, and I agree with you, it's an incredibly boring job for them, but if you are going to have an armed officer there, you make their job safer, because if somebody attacks, they know that somebody behind them or to the side who they can't identify beforehand is going to be armed. But we've looked at all the school shootings in the United States from 2000 on. There are 20 states that have armed teachers. Colorado has a few schools that have it. But you literally have thousands of schools in those 20 states that allow teachers and staff to carry. In places like Utah and New Hampshire, for example, anyone who has a concealed carry permit can carry. The thing is, there's not been 1 attack at any of those schools that have armed teachers where anybody's been wounded or killed in all those years. Every attack where anybody's been wounded or killed has occurred in schools where teachers and staff are banned from having guns.
Right. Well, and I mean, that's
crazy.
That's the biggest thing too, is that basically by allowing that to happen, you're making everything safer, because we know, and as you said, your research totally supports this, that for the most part, these people pick soft targets. So if you're, a would-be shooter and you know that there's a pretty good chance at any school you pick, say in the Denver metropolitan area, that they're going to be armed teachers there, you're not going to go to a school. You're going to go to someplace else. So by simply allowing it, it's not like you're going to be having.
It doesn't cost you any money.
It doesn't. Yeah, it's
you don't have to have a $100,000 plus person with all benefits and all that sitting around, bored out of his mind. And that's never a good idea to have somebody bored out of their mind all day, because then they get in, they find things to get into. But teachers are there anyway. So I've never quite understood why this demand for more bureaucracy, more paid people, more everything else, when the solution is so simple.
Well, and another thing, John, I don't know if you're aware of what's been going on in Colorado. The legislature is on the verge of passing. The governor will sign it.
I testified before the state Senate. You have all sorts of crazy gun laws.
Oh, did you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then we had a case where this is how the schools in Colorado work. There was a East High School. So there was a kid who was apparently accused of attempted murder and had a gun at one school district. So they kicked him out. In Denver, they bring him in. And because they kicked school resource officers, because, they're hard, after the George Floyd thing, they kicked all the school resource officers out. They had teachers with absolutely no training patting this kid down. And of course, then one day he shot them. And then
they patted him down, found a gun, but he grabbed it first and killed him. I mean, it's just,
and then they blame guns, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Biden, for example, just talks about gun violence generally. What most people don't seem to understand is that less than 8% of violent crime involves guns. And if you really want to make people safer generally, you have to just make crime riskier itself. It's the same policy you push to go and stop gun crime as you go and you stop crime generally. You have to make it risky for criminals to go and commit crimes. And unfortunately, across a lot of the country, we have police budgets being cut. We have liberal judges over the last few years releasing, in many urban areas, half or even 2/3 of the inmates from jails. We have district attorneys who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals, and we have bail reform. We just had a situation in Detroit recently where a man had killed 3 people, had done other felonies, and he was released on $10,000 bail. He went out and immediately murdered somebody else. And
they hiked his bail up to $12,000 though. So
yeah. Well, and what about, I wanted to ask you something else too, because I saw you were tweeting about this. The corruption, I think, of the media involved in this, and I don't know who decided to release it, but when you look at the fact that they immediately released all this body cam video and the surveillance video where you see people walking around with guns, looks very dangerous, looks very scary, but they won't release the manifesto where this person, the shooter, explained why they did what they did. I mean, it seems to me that is a very clear attempt to try to manipulate people regarding the gun debate. It's like, we don't want to hear why he did it. We just want to show scary looking pictures of people walking around with guns.
Well, look, the media itself hasn't covered the manifestos accurately in the past. I mean, as we mentioned before, these guys talk about why they picked the targets that they did. If we want to stop these things, don't you think that's newsworthy? Why they picked the targets that they did, that they want to pick these soft targets? But, it's beyond that. You read the New York Times, you take something like the Buffalo mass murder from last year. The New York Times has had at least 6 editorials on it, referring to the person as a right-wing conservative type. And, you read it, he's a racist, but the media seems to believe if you're a racist, that makes you a right-winger. What they ignore is that the reason why he was a racist, the reason why he hated minorities, was because he was an environmentalist. He was upset that minorities, he thought, had too many children, and that we had overpopulation, and that was damaging the environment. He called himself a socialist. He called himself an eco-fascist. I don't know how many conservatives that are upset with people having too many kids. I don't know how many conservatives that call themselves socialists or eco-fascists. But, to the media, they want to make it, this narrative that Biden's been pushing about right-wing violence. And so you look at it, most of the murders by extremists have been environmentalist types who think.
Well, and we've had quite a few here in Colorado now that are by non-binary, trans.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, NBC News is saying that, they're reporting the trans community is living in fear now, right? Never mind Christians or children.
Okay.
But in the research that you did, it does seem like, in Colorado, we had at the Douglas STEM school shooting. There was a trans person at the Colorado Springs. It was somebody who identified as non-binary. There seems to be, and it's always hard to tell. Are you paying more attention now? So it seems like the more, or are there more? But in your research and the statistics that you guys keep, do you look into that at all in terms of?
We have detailed data and all sorts of things about these guys. We have, if you go to our website, we have a large spreadsheet that was embraced out. We have like literally many dozens of columns of information there on these guys. But look, if you look at these mass public shooters, what you find is well over 70% of them have no ideological motive or anything. These guys are just suicidal. And at some point along the line, these people generally feel unappreciated. And they figured out that they could get a lot of media attention by killing people. And so you'll see things in their manifestos and diaries and other statements that they leave that if I can only kill more people than such and such, I can get my name in the history books. Okay. I can get media attention. And so you'll have people who will say things over the years, like for a while they would say, if I could only kill more people than they killed at Columbine. Or you have the Sandy Hook killer who wanted to go and kill more people than the Norway killer had killed, who shot to death 67 people. And the reason why he picked him was because that was more than any mass public shooting in the U.S. And he wanted to get even more worldwide news coverage. Look, I wouldn't even put it past some of these individuals because of their desire to get news coverage that they go and attack things like an elementary school. Because they think it'll be more shocking, and they think that will get them more news coverage this year. Look, I'm not going to go and argue that we need to get rid of the First Amendment, but I'm not going to say the media can't cover their names or whatever. But looking at what motivates them, the fact that they want to get this news coverage and they pick venues where they can kill lots of people, help us understand how to stop it. Because if you can take away their goal, if you can take away their news coverage, you'll take away their desire to do this. And the way you take away their ability to get that goal is by having somebody there quickly on the scene. As you mentioned at the beginning, look at this killer in Tennessee on Monday. There was another place that they had targeted, but they decided not to do that because there was too much security, they felt. So they moved to another target that they didn't have to worry about somebody being able to stop them.
Right. Well, exactly. And again, in the news media, and I kind of anymore think the Democrats, like you said, the fact that they over and over and over again ignore obvious solutions. To me, I think Democrats like to fundraise off of this, right? They like to have, I'm sure at the Colorado legislature, they're like, see, we told you we need more. Even though none of the bills would address anything that happened in Tennessee or really anywhere else, right? For instance, in this case, apparently the kid told a friend, and then the friend was on hold for like 7 minutes trying to call the cops, right? You could look at some of those issues, even though the cops, I think in this case, did a great job. But instead, all they want to do, and I think they want to fundraise off of it, right?
No, they have they want to get rid of guns because that makes a more placid population, and so they can use this in order to push a really sick agenda. But that's.
What do you think, John?
Well, I don't know. It's hard for me to get into people's minds about why they're doing the particular things that they're doing. What I can say is that what they're pushing isn't helping. And I said before, I wish the media once in a while would just ask them, okay, well, you want background checks on the private transfers of guns to stop these attacks. Can you name me one mass public shooting this century that would have been stopped if such a law had been in effect and perfectly enforced? Because they can't.
Right.
Well, because
So-
you assume they really want to stop these things, that they're
Well,
honest.
I can't judge that. Maybe
Well, I
they're
can.
Let him
I
talk,
think
let him
I
talk.
can.
Okay, well, you get paid more than I do to answer
Yeah,
the tough
there you go.
questions. But I'm just saying, it doesn't matter to me what their motives are. The question is what's working and what doesn't work. And I see these guys overwhelmingly pick targets where people aren't allowed to have guns for protection. I see them in their diaries and manifestos mentioning time after time that they picked those particular types of targets. And so it's hard to ignore that
Right.
that's happening. And I don't see why the media can justify to itself not covering that. How can they justify not?
Because it
You know,
didn't
they
make your
say they're
goal.
reading the diaries and manifestos. How can they justify not mentioning that? You know, even this attacker on Monday. Now it's
Right.
come out that there was another place that they had targeted that they turned down because of security. There's some local news stories on that, but have you seen any of the major
No.
mainstream networks? Have you seen the New York
Because it
Times?
doesn't fit their agenda.
Right. No, and
They've got an agenda and it
they're-
doesn't fit it.
Then we got to wait for people to wake
And
up.
and the agenda is not to make kids safer. It's
We
political
would have,
goals.
yeah.
Yeah. If that was their goal in reality, then they would
Well,
publicize it.
and finally, John, just a couple more questions. It sounds like sadly there are an ongoing series of events that allow you guys to continue to gather information. I mean, and the Crime Prevention Research Center does a great job, as you said, of compiling all of this. But it sounds like from what you're saying is that over and over and over again, you're coming up with the same answers, that it is this whole soft target versus hard target kind of concept.
Yeah, well, look, you know, it's not just these mass public shootings. I was chief economist for the United States Sentencing Commission in Washington for a while, and I must have read over 1,000 criminal trial transcripts. And what you find is that these guys pick easier jobs. You know, you'll have a case where you'll have robbers being tried, and one robber will turn evidence against his partner. And the prosecution will ask a very similar set of questions each time. They'll say, how did you decide to pick this particular victim? And they'll say, well, you know, we were talking about going after the drug dealer down the street, but he has lots of guns and lots of people. It'd be crazy. It's lots of money, but it's just not worth the risk. We talked about going after a cab driver, but a lot of the cab drivers have guns. And then we saw this small woman walking alone late at night in a parking lot, and she looked like an easy target. So we went after her.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they're not stupid if they can rob somebody and get money. But I mean, that's basically what my research has shown since then. This is people who benefit the most from having guns are the most vulnerable people in our society. They're the people who are most likely victims of violent crime. And that overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas, and people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. And the thing is, a lot of the gun control laws that they're pushing, like these background checks on private transfers, or in Colorado now, the new laws that they want to have for suits against gun makers and gun sellers, which, by the way, they can be sued already. They can be sued if they make a defective product or if they break the law and don't do a proper background check when they sell the gun. What they want to do is make it so that whenever any harm comes from their product, they can be sued. So you can imagine if you applied that to cars, for example, where somebody is talking to somebody else and not paying attention when they're driving, should Ford or General Motors be responsible for any lost wages or medical bills or pain and suffering because the guy wasn't paying attention when he was driving?
No, electric scooters, I mean, there's.
But John, you figured out through immense study and reading and everything else that one effective solution would be to harden the targets, to have people who have concealed carry be able to have those. Your next study has to be, since the media is not stupid and reporters aren't stupid, why won't they do it? And you say you can't read their mind. Well, but that's the inquiry you have to have, because all your good logic has failed because they are not reporting it. And now you've got to figure out, why aren't they reporting it?
And how to get them to.
Yeah.
There you go. That should take you a century.
A couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, John, listen, thank you so much for
We
your
appreciate
time.
it. Yeah, you're great, John.
You guys have a great resource center
Thanks.
there. All
People
right.
can find more at our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. They can find everything that we've been talking about there on our website.
That's great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you for the work you do. And thank you for testifying here in Colorado.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for all the good that you did.